And there we go. So opened the doors to the webinar. We're live on Facebook. So as everybody's coming in, hello, Peter. Hello, Jennifer.
Hello. So good to be here.
I know. I'm so glad you guys are here.
I'm
Before
really
we get
excited.
started on all of the, well, I guess I should give people a chance to come in because I think it's actually kind of one of the fascinating stories. Peter and I were talking. Jennifer, you were here earlier. We were talking about 2020, and the last time that we hosted Peter was March 10th of 2020. And
really?
It was, yes. And it was, that was like right before the world literally shut down. And Peter, you were saying earlier that it's like, it was so weird. The tour that you were on, like the progression of the tour, I think is fascinating.
Well, it was 10, because it was 10 days and you guys were the day 10, and I'd started in Chicago and sort of moved north and west. And it started out with hugs, after the reading, and then it was elbow touches. And then by Minneapolis, it was toe touching. By the time I got to you, people would hand the book like it was some, murder weapon.
Toxic.
It was.
And I'd sign it, and they'd stand 4 feet back, and I'd hand it to them, and then they'd run out the door. But I remember walking out of your store, and it's such a nice neighborhood, and I thought, well, maybe I'll go grab a beer somewhere, and the streets were just empty, and it was freaky, man. It was
really, and I do distinctly remember those first few days, how just eerie it felt. It just felt so. It was spooky. It was really spooky.
Totally.
Yeah.
But no, I distinctly remember like being in the back with you and just going, okay, we're not doing cameras. We're not, and this was before any rules came out. We were just kind of going, we don't know what this thing is. They haven't given us really any guidance. The shutdown hadn't happened, but we were like, we kind of knew it was going. The day before, I was telling you we hosted, I think it was, and we'll get going. Sorry, I digress a lot in these things. But we hosted Colin McCann, and so he had just come down from Seattle, and that was like, remember at the time, that was the hotbed. That was the
hotbed, yeah.
And so he's Irishman, the whole bit, and so I'm trying to do my distance at the end of it. We he was drinking some whiskey the whole time, and he goes, "Oh, come give me a hug," and I'm going, "Oh my god!"
You're like, no.
How do you say no to a hug from Colin McCann?
But I'll have some of your whiskey, thank you. Yeah.
Anyways, why we are here today, Peter, Warwick's loves your writing. I mean, from the moment that Dog Stars came out, and very rarely in our store do we have a book that, because we have a very eclectic group of booksellers, very rarely is there a book that everybody loves of the booksellers, and Dog Stars was that book that the entire store was just insane about. So was so happy to host you last year live. Cannot wait for this conversation about the guide. Your writing is glorious. So that's all I can say. So what's going to happen today? If you're in the webinar with us, some of you have already purchased the book. Those that have, we'll be shipping those out tomorrow. I'll be putting a link in for those that you haven't. You just need to click that and order that book. And I'll do the same thing on Facebook. I'll put that in the comment section. Jennifer, Peter are going to talk about 35 minutes. One of our favorite things is the audience questions. So if you're in the webinar, go ahead and scroll and you'll see the little Q&A button down there. Go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A. I'll bring those in. If you are on Facebook, go ahead and put those in the comment section. I'll bring those in too when they're done chatting, about 35 minutes-ish. So with that, I'll get off and let the conversation begin. We have our wonderful Jeniffer Thompson. Jennifer, so speaking of last year, we've been doing this. You jumped in and started doing interviews pretty much right away last year, didn't you, with us?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what month it was. And
yeah, like
we thought it would
June,
be temporary.
July. Yeah, we thought, oh, maybe, yeah. So
yeah.
But for those of you, so you have been doing a lot, but for those that may not be familiar with who you are, let me introduce you. Jeniffer Thompson is a personal branding expert, digital marketing strategist, and host of the Premise podcast. And Peter, this is going to be on the Premise podcast, and we do record it as well, so it's on YouTube. So lots of exposure for this one.
All over.
Yes. She is an author and speaker who delivers strategy-rich content and actionable tools that educate and empower authors. She and her husband, Chad, co-founded Monkey See Media in 2004 and have been creating award-winning book cover designs and author websites ever since. Jeniffer is also the co-founder of San Diego Writers Festival, which just happened a few weeks ago, which was fantastic. So you can see some replays of that through their website. She serves on the board of the San Diego Memoir Writers Association and is currently writing her own coming of age memoir. So with that, I've taken up enough time. You two have a great conversation. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. This is such an honor, Peter. I love this book, the guide. It's absolutely fantastic. We'll talk more about it. I'm going to introduce you officially. I'm going to read your bio so people know a little bit more about you, and then we'll talk about it. Peter Heller is the national best-selling author of The River, Celine, The Painter, and The Dog Stars, as Julie mentioned. The Painter was the finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize and won the prestigious Reading the West Book Award. And The Dog Stars has been published in 22 languages to date, at least the date of this printing. Heller is also the author of 4 nonfiction books, including Kook, What Surfing Taught Me About Love, Life, and Catching the Perfect Wave, which, by the way, sounds fantastic. I read a little bit about that one today, which was awarded the National Outdoor Book Award for Literature. He holds an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop in Poetry and Fiction and lives in Denver, Colorado. I assume you're coming to us from Denver right now.
Yes, I am.
How is it in Denver right now?
It's smoky. Oh, your smoke is coming here.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's rough.
It's been rough.
Rough summer for a lot of folks.
For a lot of people. I'm traditionally, I was born in the Pacific Northwest. I'm from the Pacific Northwest, and just from Portland to Spokane and all my family, it's just crazy. We've never had that kind of heat up there. And then the fires, and yeah, it's nuts.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Okay,
well,
but yeah, go ahead.
We could, but that wouldn't be as exciting as talking about Jack, the guide. So one of the things I wanted to start out with, and we'll talk more about the river and the guide, is, when I first read about them not having to wear masks in this story, this is the first book where the real world of COVID has seeped into fiction. So my question for you is, how long did it take to write this book? Was that something that you added in later, or when did you start writing this book?
Yeah, I started writing it smack in the middle of COVID. And
You did, okay.
Yeah, and I got COVID in last November, and I was
I'm sorry.
writing the book then. But it was all right. But I always start with the first line. I came up as a poet, and a lot more interested in music and the language than story or plot. And so it's sort of an odd method, but I start with a line whose sound I love, and I kind of follow the music of the language into the story, just kind of trust that it's going to bump me into whatever I'm really concerned about. And so I began this, I think the first line was something about, he dropped they gave him a bunk in a cabin by the river, and then it was Jack dropped his pack on the porch.
Want me to read it?
Yeah.
Maybe. Or do you want to read it?
Yeah, I'll read heck, I've got the book right here.
Yeah, if you have it, yeah, read it. It's brilliant.
Prologue. They gave him a bunk in a cabin by the river, a wooded canyon, spruce and pine with rimrock up high and rock spurs that tumbled to the water. Jack dropped his pack on the porch. So I was excited because there was a porch, and I'm a sucker for a good porch. Always love a porch, especially if it's looking over water. And there was Jack, and I was so glad to see him. I mean, I'd been, the last book, The River, he was a protagonist, and I'd left him kind of brokenhearted and pretty alone. I mean, he had to return to his ranch. He's a ranch kid from Western Colorado, spent half his life in the saddle, and I left him going back to the ranch that he runs with his old man, who's I guess,
Pop.
recalcitrant Pop. Yeah, he's taciturn. Very self-contained. So I was a little worried about Jack. So I was glad to see him. And then apparently, he had this job as a fly fishing guide. And I thought, that'll be good for you. Good. Little did I know. But COVID sort of came up, I'd say, a quarter of the way through the book. And then I went back in and I had him, go ahead and put the mask on in the first couple of pages just to make it work.
Yeah. Well, it was great. I was like, wow, here it is. Yeah, it's part of our reality. I want to take a couple steps back. So when you wrote that first line, which by the way, I love a good porch. I love the mountains. I love water streams. I mean, to me, I was just sucked in immediately. I'm like, I can't wait. This book is going to be fantastic. And it's so poetic and so beautifully written. And like your choice of words and the way you bring me into a story just is awesome. Thank you so much. But my question is, so when you wrote that line, were you surprised to see Jack? Was that just a line you were messing with and then all of a sudden Jack was there? Or did you know you were going to write a story about Jack?
No, I didn't know. And
wow,
really
that is so cool.
And the odd thing about fiction is that these characters, at least for me, live in my heart like, people that I know and that are like old friends. And Jasper from the Dog Stars, I feel like this is a dog that I had and that I still grieve. And I mean, that's kind of crazy, but neat too. So there's an origin story about this that's kind of fun. But so there was Jack on the porch, and then I did think about something that an author had told me a few years before. A few years ago, I was at a writers' festival outside of Palm Springs, and it's a kind of a fancy resort, and multi-day writers festivals, just to sort of keep myself grounded. I like to get up really early, get a cup of coffee, and do a couple of hours of work before the day starts. The mayhem, as you know, you organize these things. And so I did. I went down early to the breakfast spot, and the only author that was there was Lee Child. And so we had breakfast together and started talking about method. And I said, yeah, I just like to start with the first line and let it rip, and I have no clue. And he said, yeah, me too.
Oh my gosh.
Like, are you kidding? I mean, have you read these Jack Reacher novels? I mean, they're so tightly plotted. They seem to be. They're fast-paced. And he said, yeah, man, I just throw everything I can think of against the wall, have no idea, dead bodies, lurking, menacing figures, car accidents, whatever occurs to me that's fun, I throw it up against the wall in the first half. Second half, I just mirror all of that. I tie up all the loose threads, and whatever doesn't tie up is a red herring, and I'm good.
Oh my God.
I burst out laughing, and I said, just like you did, I said, man, I've read whole books on writing novels, Stephen King's book, John Gardner's book, and you just gave me a method in like 2 lines, awesome, thanks.
Have you seen this one? How to Write a Mystery, Lee Child.
I love it. See, he didn't have to write that book. All he had to do was say he couldn't have sold many copies if it had been the one line. But
yeah, right.
Anyway, that's very funny. I hadn't seen that. Anyway, so here I was, and I thought, every book I've written has had a different method slightly. Dog Stars was written kind of a white heat. Painter sort of loosely blocked the head and then let it run. So anyway, I thought I'd try it. And so with Jack, here he is, a fishing guide. His first client's Allison Kay. Rich and Famous use a lot of initials at this place. He goes to scout the mile and a half of river, and I threw in a camera on the Fisherman's Bridge. I threw in a post with "Don't get shot" past this post. I threw in mauling dogs. Anything I could think of, I just piled it on. But what really fascinated me was that an author could do this, and at the time, these events and details must seem random. But if it's all going to work out at the end, that suggests that there's a lot of work going on when you're asleep. And I thought that was pretty neat.
I totally agree with you. Like when I'm writing, sometimes I'll be like, wow, how did that work out? Like these things just sort of like, almost like I planned it.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, I think there is a certain amount of like your subconscious, pulling, clearly for you, pulling who you are in your life. I mean, I fell in love with Jack immediately. I gotta ask you a question.
Hmm.
Have you ever heard of Dutton on the Dolores River?
I've paddled the Dolores. I went a few years ago, we paddled early spring, and my friend spread the ashes of his old man, which was very.
Oh.
It's a beautiful run. I don't know Dutton. I don't know.
Well, Dutton is exactly what you described in the guide. There is a private fishing place that has little cabins right on the river. It's all fly fishing, super private, and they're buying up the whole mountain. And it's really becoming this sort of billionaire's mile. Rich, famous people go there. And so my friend, her grandfather had property there way back in the day, and her family cabin is there. And every fall we go fly fishing on the Dolores right next to Dutton. So this book, I was just freaking out as I was reading it. I was like, I feel like I'm on the Dolores. I'm at Dutton, or at least outside of it looking in. And it was just so cool. Obviously, this is based on a place in Colorado. There's clearly a lot of these places.
There's
I wonder.
nothing in this book that resembles any character, living or dead, any place that's real.
It's an amalgam of all of those places.
Boilerplate, of course it is. I mean, this lodge that Jack goes to work at is a super luxury. I mean, this is 5-star plus. For the very rich, and as I said, like the rich and famous, they use a lot of initials. He thinks that Allison Kay, his first client, is probably a famous country singer, but he's not sure. There's a lovely scene that just kind of unfurled itself, in which she's humming as she fishes unconsciously, and she's sort of singing, and then he hears the voice, and he's like, oh. That's who.
I know who that is. I love that scene.
Yeah.
I love Allison's character. She's so fabulous. She's like this very feminine, but like very independent. She's this fly fisher. She loves the outdoors. She speaks her mind. Like, she's so cool. Where did she come from?
I don't really know. I mean, people always, of course, are asking, is this Alison Krauss? Of course it isn't, because I don't know anything about Alison Krauss, except that I absolutely adore her music. But if I was going to imagine how Alison Krauss was, she'd probably be a little bit like Allison Kay. I don't know. Allison Kay she grew up in the mountains of North Carolina. Her father taught her to hunt. She went fishing early. She knows her way around the mountains, and she doesn't take any BS from anybody. And
no shit from anyone.
And there's a line there where things get kind of intense at this place, because there is something pretty creepy going on.
It is a thriller, after all.
Sinister stuff. And at one point, I think Jack says, you should leave. You should take the flight out this afternoon and get out of here. And what was the line? She says something like, no,
I want to see how this unfolds.
I like to know what all the mystics, she said, I'd like to know what the mystics and artists and creeps are doing all around me. Something like that. Some line like that.
Yeah. I wish I knew where it was.
Such an insight into her mind. Like, she's just so curious about everything. And she's not a quitter, which thank goodness.
Well, yeah. I love the energy between these two, just like the energy when they touch and they bump up against each other. Like, it was so fun to watch that relationship kind of burgeoning, and we don't know, like, are they going to have a relationship? It seems really unlikely, but yet they seem so perfect for each other. And that was a really fun part of the book.
Yeah, it was such a delight. So, as I said, I just, I came up as a kayaker, right? I spent half my life running rivers. And one thing I love about that is you put on the current, and if you're running a river you've never run before or has never been described, you come around a tight bend in a canyon, and you don't know what's going to be there. It could be a cougar drinking, or a waterfall, or a flight of swallows, or 5 guys with weapons who don't want you there, which has happened. But
Right.
I love the thrill and the surprise of that. And I sort of wanted that in my fiction when I started writing fiction. In John Gardner's book about writing novels, he says, write an outline and then just keep filling it in with smaller and smaller A's, B's, C's, ones, two, three, until you have a book. And I thought, man, if I was going to do that, I could have been a lawyer. I'd make a lot more steady money, right? But so I like the surprise of it. And so when Jack gets up that first morning and goes down for an early cup of coffee and she's there and they start talking, and he's got this sort of, Jack has this ranch kid's reserve, this sort of tact, this deference. But right away, he senses from her this very wry, grounded sense of humor. And she gets that from him too. And I was so delighted when I wrote their first real conversation. I was beside myself. I was like, these guys are going to become such good friends. I just have this feeling.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I love hearing you talk like that. It
Well,
makes me feel so happy.
Well, I think she says something like, she says, Jack, right? When he brings his coffee over to the hearth, which is, a big roaring fire. And she says, Jack, right? Not Jonathan or Johnny. And he says, no, my parents were too wary. She looks and says, he just looks like a ranch kid, and she says, wary? And he said, yeah, of diminutives, I guess. If I'd have been called, Johnny, they would have had a conniption. And she reassesses him right away. And she said, no, I wasn't so lucky. My parents called me, my schoolmates called me Abby. And he looks at her and he goes, life is tough. And right away, they're friends. It's pretty, it was fun.
Yeah, I love that. I loved how, for me, Jack came through, he's this rancher, time in the saddle, which you mentioned, he's a fisher, he's a kayaker, but he also went to Dartmouth. And, one of my favorite parts is when he's talking to that Japanese couple. And all of a sudden there's this moment where he doesn't want to flex. He's talking Basho, is it Basho?
Yeah.
Basho, the poet, narrow road to the deep north. And all of a sudden there's this connection and they realize this is a person of substance. But he's like thinking the same thing. Oh, these are people of substance. Talk to me a little bit about Basho and your, how you were inspired to include that as part of Jack's narrative.
It just came up, but I've loved, Basho is the most famous haiku poet in Japan. And
haiku, right?
Yeah. And tanka. And so, I've loved that poetry all my life. And also, the Tang Dynasty, ancient Chinese poetry of the 8th and 9th centuries, which I included some of in the book. Jack is reading this book, The Orchard by Li Shui, who I made up, who's fictional. And actually there's a whole book about her called The Orchard, which I published last year. People can get it on ebook or audio.
Okay, that's so cool because I was going to look that up and I didn't know that connection. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I had written, and there's a bunch of Li Shui's poems in The Orchard. But anyway, she's made up. But I just, Basho is a poet who is deeply connected to nature, as are his predecessors in the Tang Dynasty. And he keeps it simple, but he, in 3 lines, can put you knee deep in a mountain stream with shredding mist, and then break your heart and crack your universe open. And so of course Jack relates to him, because Jack is, he keeps it as simple as he can. He's connected to nature. He engages beauty in much the same way. And so I felt like they would, have a certain, that he would definitely have a love of this kind of poetry. And so it was fun to have this Japanese fishing couple come, and they're obviously very well off. It seems like they've probably fished around the world. They are extremely, they're self-contained and tactful the way Jack is, but from another part of the, another across the ocean. And I love the fact that they shared this love of the same poetry and sort of used it to measure each other. It was sort of like a sparring match. And Allison was watching, like a tennis match, and then the very polite and tactful. Oh shoot, there's Teiji and there's Yumi, right?
Yumi, yeah.
Yumi turns
Teiji and Yumi.
Yumi turns to Alice and said, "Well, are you familiar with Basho?" And she's so earthy and down to earth, and she says, "Oh, I think so, just a little. My neighbor has one of the haiku, engraved in a stone step or something like that. The one about the frog and the pond." And of course, that she's read it all, and that's what I love about her.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is another thing that just brings Allison and Jack together, right? You're just like, oh my gosh. But it feels so like subtle and perfect. Nothing feels forced. I think that's what's so beautiful about your writing is it does feel a little like nature. It reminds me of wabi sabi, moving with nature.
Mhm.
Your writing does that. You definitely move with nature and everything feels like this is where it was meant to go, even though it's a thriller and I don't know what's going to happen. Like the characters move in such a way that is very like water. If you want to know the truth.
Oh, that's lovely. I really, since the book is all about water, I appreciate that. That's nice. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the coffee mugs. I loved how Jack got to pick out people from a crowd and decide what they were going to be like based on the coffee mug they chose. Talk to us about that.
Well, I love coffee mugs. I mean, I will never have two of the same in my house. And many of them have animals on them. And it just occurred to me, like, I have a friend who's, sort of a redneck, and he comes over for coffee in Denver, and he always picks the grizzly bear mug from Yellowstone. No, it's actually from Alaska. And then,
Okay.
I have another friend who's, a little bit of a goofball, and she always picks the blue-footed booby mug from Galapagos. And it occurred to me that, these people are sort of branding themselves, with
Totally.
mugs, right? And so I used that in this scene where Jack is sort of surmising, what mug is this guy, this rich a-hole gonna pick?
Yeah. They fit so perfectly. What a great tool. I absolutely loved it. So much great stuff to talk about in this book. And the fact that, it's sort of unfolding for you in an exciting way too. I want to take a step back though. I'm going to save that question for later. I understand you're a world-class pizza delivery person, or at least you have been on your resume. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh yeah. So I got to Boulder, Colorado when I was 20. Oh,
and you're from New York? Is that
right?
right?
Yeah. I grew up in New York City. Then I went away to school. My cousins lived in Putney, Vermont. I asked if my parents politely if they could send me the heck out of New York City. And so when I was 15, I moved out of the city. I lived in Vermont. I really became a country boy pretty fast. I cut all my own firewood, probably from the time I was 16. I always had wood stoves. I started hunting pretty early. And in any event, oh shoot, I lost this. What was the question? I just lost myself.
Pizza, you're world class.
Yeah, okay.
Pizza delivery. I really took us out in left field.
This is what a fiction writer does. I was just imagining the hills of southern Vermont. I was transported and I totally lost it.
You're like, I gotta go write this down. I'll be right back. Yeah.
So funny. Oh my God. Anyway, I got to Colorado, and I learned to kayak in New England, in Vermont, New Hampshire, and the water is good then. The rivers come up in early April when there's ice in the water, snow on the banks, and it's miserable.
Sounds awful.
It's awful, but beautiful. When I got to Colorado during a summer of college to paddle with some friends, it was 90 degrees. There was big water, there was elk in the fields, there was snow-capped mountains, and it was just like I couldn't even believe it. It was, your stuff dries in 5 minutes instead of like stuffing your frozen socks against the defrost. And I just loved it. And it was a no-brainer for me to make a beeline to Colorado after college. So I did, and I was sharing a house in Boulder with a dear friend, and he was training for the '84 Olympics. He was a ski jumper, my buddy Landis. And he said, come on out. I got a house with a cheap room. And so I did. And I was writing poetry in my room during the day and paddling whenever I could, pretty crazy stuff, and delivering pizza in the evening. And I loved the job. I took it like an Olympic sport. I mean, I would see how fast I could get there, like, could I get to this address in 17 minutes? And, stop signs meant nothing, and red lights were suggestions. I mean, why would you stop at a red light if you can, for half a mile down either side of the street, there's nobody coming? I mean, that's ridiculous. So anyway, I had a gas, and then one buddy that I skied with every week, he got me a free ticket. He was a ski instructor, and he'd get me a free ticket on Mondays. And he said, you should write for Outside. You combine your interests. You're spending all day in your room writing poetry, and you're kayaking this crazy stuff. Why don't you? So I cold called them and said, you guys should send me to Tibet. And they did.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That is incredible.
Well, it wasn't quite
Wow.
like, I mean,
Okay.
I got a magazine. I looked on the masthead for the name of an editor that sounded nice, right? Different name, but they're Laura Honhold sounded really nice. So I called the 800 number. I said, Laura Honhold, please. Just a minute. I was like, oh, Laura here. I was like, oh crap. I started talking really fast. Said, hey, I had a story published in Harper's, which is sort of true. It was a tiny little reprint of a college story up in the reading section. I'm a class 5 kayaker, and you guys should send me on this expedition to run on the edge of the Tibetan plateau and to run this river that's never been run. And she said, we've heard about this expedition. We don't have a writer that can kayak class 5. I'm going to take a chance on you. I'll pay half your expenses. If you write a good story, I'll pay the other half, buy the story.
Oh,
so I was stoked because I needed a new paddle. Mine was all duct taped together. I was like, okay. And I went, and that was my first assignment. And a guy died on the first day in my arms in a log jam. And
my God.
it was really traumatic. And but that's how, strange way to start in professional writing, but that's how it started.
Yeah. Is that part of where the river, the book came from? Did the impetus for the river come from that trip?
No, the river came, that was another interesting story. That was a third date with my then somebody I was just dating. It wasn't even really my girlfriend. I thought she was really cool. On the third date, she in Denver said, let me drop my gym bag. It's kind of valuable. Let's drop it off at your house before we go to dinner. And we did. And I picked it up. It was really heavy. I said, what's in this? And she said, weaponry. And she unzipped it, and there were short swords, throwing stars, daggers, all this stuff. She's training to be a ninja, And I thought at dinner, we were talking, I was kind of watching her, and I said, thought to myself, this girl's pretty tough. I mean, she could protect me. So I invited her on this assignment that I had to canoe the Winnisk River, which is the river in the river. And so that was, now we're married, even though she filled up the canoe with fossils and rocks and we lost all our freeboard.
She's your current wife?
My one and only ever wife.
That is fantastic. I love her so much.
Yeah.
I want a book about her, but anyway, go on.
So, that is the river in the river. And then there's other things that inform the river, like I almost got overcome by a forest fire once. So.
Oh, wow. You've lived a really incredible life. I think I get the feeling that you're the kind of person that is like water. You open yourself to whatever seems to be like, okay, I'm gonna go this way. Like the path of least resistance. That's like, just seems like a good direction to move in, or
path of least,
like to move.
And I do this in the writing too, because if you're gonna write with this method where you just follow the language, I always just go to where the energy is and where my curiosity. Sometimes it's not the path of least resistance. I mean, if you're gonna commit yourself to a class 5 expedition on some river in another continent that's never been run,
that's all resistance, if you ask me.
It's, you have to get out. I'm scared. I'm like frightened before I go, and I'm thinking, gosh, I hope I come back from this. And you have to train hard, and that's painful. And it's the same thing with writing. But I go where the curiosity is and where the energy is.
So you do.
And as I'm writing along, I can feel. It's like I can feel if I take this if I take this path, I can feel the energy dropping, and I know that I'm going to write myself into a cul-de-sac. So I kind of edge the horse over and let's go on this path.
We got to go this way. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
When you wrote the guide, were you thinking about access to nature? Accessibility just for humans in general. This whole.
Yeah, that is an issue. I mean, I have fished private water before. I mean, I got assignments to fancy fishing lodges, and I found that I didn't love it so much. For one, the anticipatory service at a 5-star lodge is kind of weird. I mean, I'd head down, decide, okay, I'm going to go try the sauna. It looks over the river, looks really nice. And halfway down the path, someone meets me with a pile of towels, and it's kind of creepy. It's like, well, how did they know? People love that.
Sitting there waiting.
I don't. Yeah. And then I find, that I'm really happiest on my little mountain creek in Colorado. We have I have a little cabin in the mountains, and 25 minutes away is a mountain creek that I fished in every season, every time of day. I was heartbroken when my first book got published, when I was jubilant. And it's a touchstone, and it's a wooded canyon, and the creek drops away from the road. You're all by yourself. There might be an elk crossing. You might look up in the evening and there's an elk standing there, 100 yards above you. And I just love it. And no 5-star lodge or private water can match that. And I don't think fishing water should be private. I mean, it's right. It's just like national seashores. None of that. No beaches should be private.
Agreed.
So I think I was writing a little bit about that too.
Yeah, I wondered if you were thinking about that. And I get the sense, how connected you are to the natural world. Also, the work you've done with Outside and, a lot of your nonfiction, obviously, you care about the natural world. And I think that's part of it, giving access to everyone so everyone can appreciate, because how can we protect this planet if we don't appreciate her? And we don't appreciate her if we don't have access to her, right?
That is very, very true. And I hope, that people who read my books that, maybe they have never really been, hiking or fishing. Maybe it will inspire them, because that's the only chance our planet has, right? As you said.
Yeah, it's us. How ironic is that, right?
Yeah.
I want to ask you about something because it's close to my heart. It's another departure, and then we're going to go back to Jack. The Cove. I saw that movie many years ago, and people probably always ask you this, but I am so impressed that you went in there and were part of the crew that did the footage. I want to know, what were you thinking? And just to kind of give people an idea of the Cove, do you want to just give us just a little brief synopsis of what that documentary was about and why?
Well, so I had written a book about Sea Shepherd. I'd gone with Sea Shepherd to Antarctica on one of their eco pirate ships, the all black ship that flies under Jolly Rogers and ran the Japanese whaling fleet and all that. So I'd written that. Yeah. The guys who were were in the middle of making the Cove, read it, and they invited me to come with them to the infamous Cove in Taiji, Japan, where the fishing boats corral pods of dolphins into this very tight inlet, and then they net it off, and then they slaughter the whole pod. And it's not, it's a horrible way to kill anything, but especially a self-aware dolphin or small cetacean. They spike them to death behind the blowhole, and there's a lot of, they gush blood and they scream, and the other members of the pod know everything that's going on, and they know they're next. The whole thing is just like
horrific.
Hell. And this Cove is guarded. It had armed guards. It had barbed wire, razor wire. We went in at night and planted cameras. We threw rugs over the razor wire, went in, planted cameras that looked like rocks and birds' nests around the Cove. This had never been filmed or witnessed. And the fishermen who did this, they knew that if this footage ever got out, it would probably, the outcry would be so bad, so they really protected it. And then I was up on this cliff with camo on and face paint with the director, Luis Cejoyos, and one of the filmmakers, James, and we heard the radio there, and it was dark, and the light was just coming up, and they said, they're starting to kill, go down, run down. So I ran down, got in a wetsuit and paddled out with 5 4 other surfers, and we paddled right out into the cove. And by the time we got there, by daylight, it was already slick red with like paint red with blood, the whole cove. And there was, they were killing, and there was 12 little pilot whales, basically dolphins, up against the nets. And they triple netted it, so you couldn't just cut a net, I mean, it wouldn't have done anything because there were 2 more. And they were panicked and freaked, and we formed this surfer circle, and we just prayed for them and for like the original surfers. And when they realized we weren't a threat, they sort of calmed down a little bit, and the little baby like spy hopped and looked at us, and I just had tears, and I got back from that, and I knew all those 12 would be killed in the next hour. And I got back from that. It was an assignment for Men's Journal, I remember. And they had put a GoPro on my head, and I had filmed the part in the movie which won an Academy Award, where the fishermen attack the surfers with these long poles. That was the footage that was on my little helmet cam. And I got home, and I would, for like weeks, my wife would go to sleep beside me, and I would just cry. I mean, it was like the worst thing I'd ever seen or could imagine. And I realized then, that I had a responsibility. I mean, that those little pilot whales were trying to communicate with us. I mean, they were communicating with us, and it was like I had this responsibility somehow to speak for the ones that didn't have a voice, in our world. And it was profound for me.
I bet. Oh, I'm sure it was. I'm sorry to bring you back there. I was just so like, wow. Like, I read your book, and then I read about you, and I was like, man, this man is incredible. Like, the things you've done and the places you go and the situations you put yourself in are incredibly impressive. I also feel like, your book's a piece of you, it has a message for Mother Earth and the goodness in people, even though we're talking about murder and it's a thriller and like there's crazy stuff happening. Like, there's this piece of it that's really about the goodness in humans too, and what we can do to be better people and better servants, I think. What is next for Jack? Well, go ahead. If you want to comment on that, please do.
Well, yeah. And I think that there's a line in there where Jack asks Marilyn Robinson. He remembers asking Marilyn Robinson, the wonderful novelist, because she taught at Dartmouth where he was, and asked her, what is evil? And she says, impediment to being. And when I was at Iowa, she was my teacher, and we became friends. And I was in her backyard drinking iced tea, and I asked her, what is evil, do you think? Because I knew she wrote a lot about religion and metaphysics. And she said, impediment to being. And I've thought about it ever since. And I, just to speak to your point about humans, I think what's going on in this novel and in the world now with the 6th great mass extinction and climate change and all that is, I think that impediment to being means subverting the natural order. And that's what evil is. And I think that, in this book, people are trying to subvert the natural order. I think in the world right now, we are subverting the natural order, and it's wrong. And I think that the chance that we have is that, human beings have this incredible capacity for grace, for redemption, and for waking up, and taking care of each other and others. And so I'm banking on that. I mean, we have to, right?
I think sometimes, fictional characters have more of an opportunity to change the way people think, not just about themselves, but about our world and the way they treat it, even more so than nonfiction, because we become so emotionally invested in these characters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe that's why we write, right? I mean, I write because it's the only thing I know how to do, and drink coffee.
Do you drink out of the same coffee mug?
Yeah, I have.
Every
Well,
time?
I usually get a new mug for every book.
Oh,
So the mug that I'm drinking out of now has a bunch of, I got in Mexico surfing this year, and it has a bunch of palm trees, and it's, hand glazed. And I think the one before for the river was, that was another surfing mug. Interesting. Huh.
I want.
Write a book set in the tropics.
We need to see a picture of like the cover and then the mug associated with the cover and put those on your website so we can go be inspired by your coffee mugs.
That's funny.
Are you Jack? Jack, you.
That's so fun. You know, when the Dog Stars came out, I got questions whenever I read, people would say, "Are you Hig?" And I would say, well, Hig is 6'2" and he can cook. So, you know, clearly I'm not Hig. But do you relate to Jack? Like, I'm not Jack, but his wariness of people, the way he engages with his reading poetry with beauty, the things he values in people, the loyalty, you know, all that sort of stuff, I think I relate to very strongly. And so, you know, when I say it at the beginning that I was worried about him, I wasn't being flip. I mean, I really, you know, I feel very close to Jack. Not that he's me, but I really relate. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if like subconsciously you have been carrying that around, like knowing that he needed some resolution. I mean, as readers of the river, we need a resolution.
Yeah.
Is there more for Jack?
You know, if he shows up, you know, as I said, you know, I just, you know, I sit and I just sort of listen for that first line. And, you know, if he shows up again and wants to speak, of course.
Of course. It's really not up to you, is it? I guess we'll leave it up to Jack.
No.
Well, I know we're running out of time and Julie's probably going to join us. Hi,
That's
Julie.
me. Hello, I'm back.
I want to ask Peter one more question.
Sure, go ahead.
Peter, do you have a favorite director?
Oh, interesting question. Wow. Might be John Huston. I love old Westerns.
Love it.
Nice. Very nice.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
This conversation was, I was sitting here because usually, I mean, I don't want to say the spoil to other authors, but most of the time I'm in the background doing other things. I was riveted to this screen. Peter, I adore you. Your writing fills me up. This conversation was amazing.
So good.
So, thank you.
I loved it. Thank you.
We do have a couple questions coming in. And I think I know the answer to this one, at least from my perspective, but do you think people need to read The River before they read The God? I don't.
No, I don't. But let me say first, I mean, if we're ending the conversation with Jeniffer, I just want to say that was really fun. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh no, she's going to stay with us.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter. I think you're fabulous. I just want to go fly fishing or probably not kayaking, but climbing.
Well, before we get to the
rock
river
climbing.
Jeniffer, I was going to ask you, is your friends on the, what was the place that you go fly fishing?
Oh my gosh, yeah, we go to Dutton.
No, Dutton. Is your friends the Crooters? Or however you say the name
Oh. Kreutzer.
Like Kreutzer? Is that
Kreutzers? No, the Howarths. Actually,
yeah,
they're the Howarths.
Yeah. They're not the ones in that.
They're not those.
No.
They're not the bad guys.
They're definitely the good guys. In fact, my friend is a lot like Allison, like that kind of a badass woman. She's an entomologist, actually, and just a badass of a lady. Like if I were to see the real Allison, it would be my friend who lives up or has a place up in Colorado and fly.
I was just teasing.
I know you were, but by the way, I want to answer your question.
The way you were describing where they were at, I was just like, oh, well,
they're the neighbors. They're the neighbors.
They're the neighbors.
I did not read The River.
Yeah, and I don't think you need to either. I've read
but I'm going to go back and I'm going to read it. I can't wait to read it, but I read this one first. And it's amazing. And I'm always so impressed when a writer can write the second book, and the first one, you don't even know there was a first one, but I started to get the sense. So I'm excited to read it.
So that's how you feel about it too, Peter, is that it's like you
really No, of course. No, I would never write a book that you had to, forced you to read another one. It's not fair.
You're more kind. Yeah.
I love it. That's the kinder, gentler part of you, right? It's just like, that's the thing. Okay. So Sarita is asking, and you alluded to your first big assignment thing, but she was wanting to know, was there an event in your life that inspired you to become a writer?
My dad used to read to me every night before I went to sleep. the other day in an interview, I said, he put me to sleep. That's not what you do with your kid. And he read a lot of poetry to me. You know, he was reading E.E. Cummings to me when I was like 6, and thank God I didn't understand them because they're kind of bawdy, but I love the sound of the language. And so I wanted to be a poet starting when I was like 6 or 7. And then I was in my little library in Brooklyn Heights, and the librarian, Annie Bosworth, was English, and I was 11 and I had a crush on her, and I would have married her that day. For the way she just said my name, she said, "Pita, you're looking for something to read?" And I was like, thump, 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 thump. And she took me over to the fiction shelf, pulled off In Our Time. She'd been following my reading since I was 5. And she pulled off In Our Time by Hemingway. And I read that slim book of short stories, mostly about Nick Adams up in Michigan. And I was just, my jaw just dropped. It's like, I want to do this. I mean, I want to carry a rucksack up like Nick up through the woods of the Upper Peninsula and fish for those big trout on the Big Two-Hearted River and make camp and not burn my tongue on the coffee. And I wanted, like in the end of something, that beautiful breakup story, I wanted to have a girlfriend that could row and fish like a man, and that I could break up with her like Nick did, you know. But mostly what I wanted after reading that book, it was the first time I'd experienced prose that went like through my skin straight to my heart. It kind of bypassed the head, you know. And you know, whatever people think of Hemingway now, I mean, he's a problematic figure, but the cadence of it and the clarity of it, it went straight into my heart. And I was like, okay, I want to do that. I want to do that too. And so I think—
And you do, because your writing does exactly that. Every time I open up one of your books, I don't know what it is, but it's like this just calm comes over, and this, you just get into this like, oh, we're here. We're at, you know, you just have that ability to just, it does the same thing. So
well said.
Thanks.
Okay, so Katie, hi Katie. I can't believe you're here with us. Thank you. This is
Katie Moss.
It's Katie Loss.
Hi Katie, thanks for the book. Sorry to miss you in Denver. Greatest mega fan reader ever. She's awesome.
Yeah, she is. I was telling Peter earlier, Katie, we were talking about you. Your ears must have been burning a little bit. That you are an author's dream and a bookstore's dream, and you are the best supporter of all of us. So thank you, Katie. And I did put Peter in the chat, the ebook, Kobo ebook version of The Orchard. So her comment and question is that it's so different than your others. Can you talk about it a bit? And then she wants to know, can you convince Knopf to publish it in hardcover?
Oh yeah. So the Orchard. So I started with a first line, and it happened to be first person 8-year-old girl, POV. And that was interesting and different. The Orchard is about a legendary translator of Tang Dynasty poetry, particularly the work of this woman, Li Shui, from the 8th century. This legendary translator, Haley Cormier, is in her mid-30s, and she moves from Denver, Colorado to a defunct orchard in southern Vermont with her little daughter, Frith, who's 8. And she's in a way recapitulating the same self-exile that Li Shui took from the court into the mountains when she had her little daughter. And the book is just about this little girl, Frith, and her mom, and Rosie, their best friend, and their dog, Bear. And it's very quiet. And I just love it. And it's full of the poetry. You know, it's got a bunch of the poems in translation of Li Shui, who, as I said, you know, I made up. So I had to somehow recreate classical Tang Dynasty poems. And it was so cool. Lovely. You know, I was reading at Crested Butte, which is pretty much where this current book takes place, right? It's up in the mountains. It's a beautiful town. They have this library that's all made out of stone. It's a rock library, old building, and it's beautiful. And upstairs is where you do the readings. It was packed house. I was reading The River, and then at the end, someone asked what I was working on. I told them that I just finished The Orchard. What was it about? A woman came up to me afterwards and said, you know, I am a translator of Tang Dynasty poetry. That's what I do. And I was like,
of course,
wow, you know, and I said, can I send you the manuscript? And I did. And she wrote me back and said, these poems are absolutely wonderful. And they work, they pass as classical. And I was just so proud and so happy.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love that. And then we're running out of time. We've taken up, I love it, but I have to end with one quick thing too. And Jeniffer, maybe you know or don't know, and Peter, I'm sorry, I'm not really familiar with your nonfiction writing, but when you said that you wrote a book called The Kook, you do know we have like the Cardiff Kook, which is it's a statue that they built they were supposed to, it's up at Cardiff, one of the big surf spots that's here in the North County. And it was supposed to be this like art installation thing that was supposed to like really honor surfing in the whole bit. And the guy's like awful. It's this. So they've named him the Cardiff Kook, which I just think
I love it. I love that.
So the next time you're here,
Kook is one of those words. So kook is about a beginner surfer in that whole progression,
right?
Learning to surf, and kook is usually preceded by effing.
Right, exactly.
You effing kook, get the F out of the water before I effing kill you.
Great, this big surf spot, it's here in
That's
North
great.
County, and it is
That's
just
great.
like the worst statues.
Great.
You have to go by, you have to drive by next time you're here.
Yeah.
We'll send him a picture.
Yeah, exactly. All right, you two, this was fantastic. I put all of the links. If you don't see the links, go to Warwick's. I didn't even say where Warwick's was for anybody, but I'm assuming everybody that's here. We are in La Jolla, San Diego, California. I forgot to say that earlier. So we'd love to have you come in the store and pick up Peter's book, order it, whatever you need to do. Get this book. You will not be disappointed.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful.
Thank you,
Wonderful
Peter.
to be with you guys.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
So great to be
Thank
with you.
you.
When I close this out, we go away. We don't go back into a green room. So
right.
It is good night for all. So good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Bye.